Hello again. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jim Antony. I'm Dean of the Graduate Division, and I will be your moderator for this Faculty and Research Town Hall. Once again, we have a group of panelists to provide us with some updates on our operations during the COVID-19 pandemic and to answer your questions. Now, some of these questions were submitted during registration, but please feel free to use the Q&A window to submit any questions you might have for our panelists. Due to time limitations, we will not be able to get to all of your questions, but we will log the questions as they come in and we'll post the answers on the Return to Learn website. We're going to put the link to the Return to Learn website in the chat right now. This webinar has live closed captioning available in two ways. First, you can click on the closed caption button at the bottom of the screen and select Show Subtitles, or you can also click on the link that is now going to be pasted into the chat. Now, one reminder before we get started. Due to the significant security incident involving UC employee information due to the Acelion data breach, we encourage everyone to enroll in UCOP free identity monitoring services. Please visit cybersecurity.ucsd.edu for more details, and we'll post that in the chat right now as well. So without further ado, I'd now like to introduce our Chancellor, Chancellor Pradeep Khosla, who will make some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Dean Antony, and good morning, and welcome everybody. As we plan to come back to campus, or as we plan to finish up this quarter, finish our graduation, which incidentally is the only graduation in the UC system to be held in person, and there's a high likelihood that some of the regions might be attending the graduation, and I'll keep you posted on that. And we are planning on our summer session, and we are planning for a fall opening session. And we are all hoping that the fall opening will be primarily in person, as we have announced before. I can tell you that we continue to see a very high volume of traffic, and this is in preparation of the fall opening and also the vaccination process. As of right now, my numbers tell me that about 70% of our faculty are fully vaccinated, faculty and staff are fully vaccinated, and about 75% have completed their first dose. So for those of you who are done with your vaccination or you have started the process, congratulations and thank you. And for those of you who are still waiting, if there's anything we can do to help you get in line, let us know. If the IT system, if the My Turn system is causing a problem, please feel free to send email and we'll find a way to get you in line. Secondly, we are offering between 2,000 and 5,000 doses every day. So the momentum is there, but clearly it is reducing. And as of May 31st, we're going to close the REMAC facility for vaccination, and we're going to move the vaccination to the Price Center. And this would be good for everybody because we're expecting lower volumes. The other point I want to make is, as we think about reopening in the fall, we are being very cognizant of people's safety, making sure that the reopening and coming back to campus in person is based on our operational needs and done in a very methodical, thoughtful way. So any thoughts you have on that issue, you're welcome to submit, and we're happy to hear from you. Let me just say thank you one more time. We have not yet left the dark tunnel of the pandemic yet, but you can see the light we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I just want to say a thank you one more time. Without your support, your commitment, your indulgence, we would not be where we are. We are coming out of this pandemic stronger than we went in. And I'm hoping that we can maintain the momentum. We can start the process of faculty hiring and a whole bunch of other good investments starting July 1. So thank you one more time. Keep up the great work, and I'm always happy to hear from you. Back to you, Dean Antony.
Thank you, Chancellor Khosla. I'd now like to introduce and welcome our first co-host of this town hall, UC San Diego Executive Vice Chancellor, Elizabeth Simmons.
Thanks very much, Dean Antony. It's really great to see everybody here this morning, and it's been very exciting to see the tremendous progress in vaccinations that the Chancellor alluded to, leading to greater presence of faculty and researchers and staff here on campus. I run into more and more colleagues here in person on campus every day, people I haven't seen in over a year, and it's just tremendous to get the chance to catch up. If you haven't come to walk around campus recently, you might want to do so. There's some new buildings, there's some new public art that have been constructed and installed over the last year, and there's a lot to see and to rediscover. So as our thoughts turn to coming back to campus more frequently over the summer and then really being back fully in person in a big way in the fall, I know there are many questions on people's minds, and I'm glad that you've come here to the town hall because the presentations will try to answer as many of those questions as we can. So thanks again for being here. Back to you, Dean Antony.
Thank you, EVC Simmons. I would like now to introduce our next co-host, UC San Diego Vice Chancellor for Research, Sandra Brown.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dean Antony. A pleasure to be with all of you today. We have lots of exciting news from the research venue, and already are pleased that we have almost 10,000 people coming to campus at least every couple of weeks to engage in all types of research. You know that all types of research are open for activity now. And one of the things we'll be doing today is just reviewing what are the new guidelines that enable faculty, researchers, and our staff and our students to be in those research venues. Second thing I'd like to say today is that from the research side, the budget's looking really good. That is that there are leftover funds that the feds have not yet allocated. So those of you who are struggling with ways to catch up due to the challenges posed by the SARS-CoV-2, there's an opportunity for you there. And next year's federal budget, as well as state budget, looks really good from a research perspective. So we'll talk about that more later, but welcome to everyone. Pleased to have you with us today, and we'll look forward to answering your questions either directly today or through online venues where we'll make the answers available for the questions that you posed today. Thank you. Welcome all, and back to you, Dean Antony.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Brown. Okay, I'd like to now introduce our first presenter, Dr. Natasha Martin, Associate Professor of Medicine. Dr. Martin will update us on the pandemic, on vaccines, and of course on modeling.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Dean Antony. So the epidemic continues to cool in the US. As you can see here, we're now seeing less than 30,000 new cases per day, which is actually the lowest number that we've seen of daily cases in over a year. So that's incredibly promising. And India too seems to have peaked and is heading downwards, as you can see. So good news in terms of the global situation. Next slide, please. Closer to home here in San Diego, the case rate continues to drop, now at 2.4 per 100,000 cases per day. And the test positivity rate has actually recently dropped below 1%. So very good news here. Next slide, please. Echoing that good news, the campus is also incredibly quiet. You can see here in the middle of the slide, we're getting most days we have no student cases, maybe one per week, and most days we also have no employee cases. In the last 7 days, we've seen 2 cases on campus, no off-campus students, and 1 campus employee. So very quiet. Next slide, please. Now turning into vaccination. So we're seeing steady progress across the United States, getting people vaccinated. In the last week, we crossed a really important threshold. Nationally, over 50% of the population over the age 12 had received at least 1 dose of the vaccine. Adults can receive the Pfizer, Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson vaccines. People as young as 12 can receive the Pfizer vaccine. Earlier this week, Moderna announced that their vaccine is well tolerated and immunogenic in children as young as 12. And so it will likely be approved for that group shortly. And studies of children between 2 and 11 are currently underway. But our best bet is that vaccines for that age will be available by later this summer. Next slide, please. San Diego County is doing even better than the national average. You can see here 68% of the county has received at least one dose, and UCSD as a whole is in even better shape from the data that we have, 75 to 80% of our population vaccinated. So really good news. Next slide, please. So turning a little bit to issues related to the variants of concern and their implications for vaccine protection. The formal definition of variants of concern is here. And the most important issues that get a variant classified as a variant of concern are looking at whether it's more easily transmitted, whether it's more likely to cause severe disease, or whether it's more likely to be less well covered by the available vaccine. So those are the three key aspects that we look at. Next slide, please. So we've talked a bit in these town halls about the variants that were first identified in the UK and South Africa and Brazil. More recently, we've learned about a collection of strains that are three strains that are closely related, identified in India. Those are designated the B.1.671.1, B.1.671.2, and B.1.671.3. Those three variants have a number of critical mutations. One of them is a mutation in the position 484, which is circled here on this slide. And that amino acid is not exactly the same as the one that was identified in the strains first identified in South Africa and Brazil, but it has the same effect, which is that it makes the virus less well controlled with our current vaccines than the older strains. Next slide, please. This slide just shows a general summary about our current view of the variants and their transmissibility, as well as susceptibility to vaccination. Compared to the previously dominated strains, all of the variants grow more rapidly and are more efficiently transmitted than the prior strains. As you can see here, the strain in California that was identified is slightly more effective at transmission, but not as efficient as the newer strains, so it will likely be outcompeted by these other strains. Each of these strains, but particularly the ones that have mutations in that position 484 that I mentioned, so the ones first identified in South Africa, Brazil, and India, have drifted immunologically from the previously dominant strain, and they are the most concerned in terms of vaccine efficacy. The mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, cover all of these current strains quite well. And so that's the really good news. The mRNA vaccines are incredibly effective and only have a very small loss of activity against the new variants. The adenovirus vaccines, the J&J and AstraZeneca, do less well, especially against the strains identified in South Africa, Brazil, and India. But overall, as I mentioned, the mRNA is very potent against all these strains. Next slide, please. And finally, in an effort to enhance our science-driven approach to decision-making, our team has currently undertaken some updates to our campus modeling to simulate the fall 2021 situation. The goal of this modeling work was to inform contingency planning for the fall. And so we used the modeling with plausible worst-case scenarios to try to estimate the number of infections and isolation housing need that we can anticipate on campus. So this model, just a reminder, simulates transmission among the full population of students, both on campus or off campus, faculty and staff. And it incorporates the sort of unique and complex networks of interactions, both within residences and buildings on campus, classrooms on campus, and sort of random campus encounters, which are kind of social interactions between our UC San Diego community populations. Importantly, in the model, we also incorporate a kind of external risk of infection among everybody due to interactions with individuals outside of the UC San Diego community, so family and just interactions in the broader community. And so we call those transmission events community-acquired transmissions. And what we've seen over the course of this year is that the vast majority of infections that we have detected among our UC San Diego populations, both students as well as faculty and staff, have likely been acquired in the community and not on campus. And so here on the bottom left, what I'm showing you is some modeling that we've done for the fall term. And we're looking at the total number of transmissions that we anticipate over fall term, both campus, which is shown in the red, and community related, which is shown in the gray. So these numbers are assuming a plausible worst case estimate of 75% of employees and students vaccinated. Of course, we're nearly at that point among our employees, so it could likely be much higher. But what you can see with these conservative estimates is that we anticipate that even with increased density, so shifting from singles instruction and singles density and hybrid instruction on the left, all the way up to doubles residences and full in-person instruction on the right-hand side of that slide. Regardless of that increase in density, we expect to see fewer than 15 or 20 total transmission events occurring on campus over the whole course of the term. So, 1 to 2 per week among our whole population of 60,000. In the gray bars, you can see, like we've seen over the course of this year, we anticipate the vast majority of infections to be acquired outside of the UC San Diego community, within the community. And so overall, I think this is really important work indicating that even with our worst case scenario estimate of vaccination, we can anticipate that with a fully in-person return, very, very low amounts of transmission on campus. And we'll continue to use this modeling as part of the data-driven approach to enable the resumption of campus activities while leveraging the effective and adaptive strategies we've developed over this year, which have been so successful in keeping our campus safe. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Dean Antony. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Always great to hear from you. Now we will hear from Terry Winbush, Acting Chief Human Resources Officer. Terry is going to brief us on return to campus strategies and, of course, on the impact on research.
Thank you, Jim. And if we can move to the next slide. So our return to campus strategy, as many of you have heard from me before, is grounded in equity, safety, and innovation. Many people ask, well, I understand what safety means, and I appreciate those comments about how safe the campus has been. And I know what innovation means. I'm engaged in working at an institution that innovation is such a foundation of what we do, but I don't actually understand this concept of equity. And equity is really about fairness. Equity does not mean equal, meaning every single person in the exact same title code will have the exact same work modality. It really goes down to what work is required to be performed and where is it best performed. And then being fair and transparent about explaining that process and not having any bias in any or favoritism in any of that planning. So I hope that helps to understand how we are engaged in this planning and our foundational strategies. So you should all be expecting to receive communications from your vice chancellors or your senior leaders within the next week or so that will tell you what the next stage of planning is for your group. That might be that you won't have any change until August 4th, or that you won't have another change until September 1st. It may mean that you won't have a change until sometime in July. And if that's the case, you'll get information about those changes and what that might mean for you. If you haven't heard anything, you're not coming back to campus on June 1st. So, or shifting your work modality on June 1st. June 1st is Tuesday, and I know there's a lot of anxiety, but if you haven't heard anything, that means there's no change yet and that you'll be receiving a communication soon. Because as a reminder, whenever possible, staff will get at least 30 days notice before they return to on-site work or have any shift in their modality. Many of you know this, but I think it bears saying, we have already demonstrated safety on this campus over the last 15 months, where we have had employees coming on site to campus at work every day. And we have demonstrated incredible safety in many ways. The campus has been more safe than other areas of the community. So this is not an experiment for those of you who will be getting notification of a shift in modality. We do know how to do this. It will be an adjustment, as all change is, and we can all do this together. Something that many of you should know is that we do have a return to campus support desk for all of your return to campus questions. And you can email that desk at hr@ucsd.edu. They are open Monday through Friday from 8 to 4. And we have a group of folks who are there to answer all the questions that you may have about return to campus. As was discussed a little bit earlier, and I know will be discussed some later, how this all impacts research is there are many staff employees who are in research, and a lot of this planning involves a lot of employees who engage in research. Now, our shift back to campus does not mean we are shifting away from our strategies around safety. There's been no change at this stage about whether or not people need to be masking in circumstances, whether they need to be continuing to wash their hands, whether they need to remain 6 feet apart, unless there's been specific clearance because of the type of work that's been done, being done that requires something of a shorter distance between personnel. Training dates have been scheduled through early July for supervisors, managers, and employees around these return to campus ideals and how to build inclusive teams and trust, manage remote and hybrid teams, and then collaboration and communication tools for teams. And that's the training that's for everyone. Later this summer, we'll be offering and being on an inclusive team and building trust for employees as well, because everybody has a share in the process of being inclusive and having a mindset where you can have trust among each other and psychological safety. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Let's go back to Vice Chancellor Brown. Vice Chancellor Brown is going to highlight all of our successes in research.
Well, I won't be highlighting all of them because I would spend the entire rest of this meeting highlighting all of our successes, but I will say a few things. First, just to reinforce what Terry Winbush was saying, really research has been on campus all during the pandemic. We're now over 9,000, almost up to 10,000 faculty, staff, and students who are here. And we don't have any evidence that the COVID-19 transmission has occurred in the research settings. So we've been working and we've been learning new ways of working. So congratulations to you all. You've also been working very hard. We have about 500 COVID-19 applications that have been submitted either as new grants or to augment the work that you're doing, and already received $56 million in COVID-related research. Overall, the grant proposals have been up a lot, which means you've been working a lot. We have good news related to also to your efforts, and that's that we have a new Quali IRB system that's going to go live in July. This is really important because it'll make it easier for you both to apply for the human subjects research that you do, and it'll be easier for you to update and to deal with any modifications or changes that you have. And trainings are already available. I believe we're going to have our director of the IRB on to answer questions later. I also want to mention just very briefly that really the state and the national commitment for having research be part of the recovery here in the United States. There is a doubling of funding for DARPA. We have a new IARPA health unit. The NSF has established a new division that focuses on innovation and technology. These are all areas that UCSD researchers can take advantage of, and I encourage you to do that. Information about that's up on our website. And then additionally, as we always encourage, but this year especially, there will be funds, end of the year funds that may be available. So if you need augmentations to your project, if you need extra support for your graduate students, now's the time to get that type of information in, or those requests in. So we have good news that we have that new quality system for IRB. That's on top of our quality system that's already operating for grants. The challenging news, which is outlined in the next slide, is that there are new requirements unfolding for federal grant applications. So could I have the next slide, please? And while these focus on any outside activity and any foreign engagement, they're starting at NIH, but they're really going to be adopted by all of the agencies. And so we're going to be working with you to figure out how to make it as easy as possible for you to comply with what the new expectations will be with regard to grant applications. There will be additional requests to identify research projects and appointments that you might have outside of UCSD. Students that are outside of UCSD that you're bringing to train with you in your laboratories. If you have foreign grants, for example, we're going to need to have them translated and actually submitted before the federal agencies will be willing to fund your projects. And then finally, there will be a consistent effort to evaluate talents program involvement. And in some cases, for a number of federal agencies, they may prohibit funding if there is involvement in one of the foreign talents programs. We've got lots of discussions going on at a federal level to try to address these things. And these new changes won't be in place until January. So we'll keep you informed about that. We will do everything that we can, including getting your ideas as to how to best manage some of the new challenging requirements, because we, as always, want to make it as easy as possible for you to get your research funded. So I think I'm going to turn it back to Dean Antony, because we have Dean McCarrow, Associate Vice Chancellor Christic, our Chief Information Security Officer, Michael Korn, and the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Contracts and Grants. All are going to be sharing information with you about important research updates. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chancellor Brown. So let's go ahead and do that. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Jim McCarrow, Dean of the Skaggs School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. Dr. McCarrow is going to tell us about guidance for density and social distancing.
Great. Thank you, Dean Antony. So I can be brief. I think most of you probably already know about research ramp-up plans. So these are required for all on-site research activity. If you haven't submitted one, please do. The forms are available at the Research Ramp-Up website. And the link is already put there. I was just about to say, please put the link there. The link is there. Also, there is a lot of information on the Research Ramp-Up website, which probably would answer a lot of the questions that you have. So I would really ask you to check that out first. It might answer your question before you post that question. Important, as Vice Chancellor Brown indicated, there's been no transmission in research settings. This is great, and thanks to all of you for making sure that's the case. As a result, there is no longer any restriction for laboratory personnel based on density. In other words, you don't have to have 25% or 50% of your people in your lab. You can have people in your lab as long as they're listed on the research ramp-up plan. Okay, so the capacity of your lab is now only restricted by physical space in order to maintain 6-foot distance between personnel. Now, just to make sure you understand what that means, that just means if 2 people are working in the lab on a project, let's say one's doing a PCR reaction and the other's running a gel, they need to be 6 feet apart. Someone's working in the hood, someone's not working in the hood, they need to be 6 feet apart. That does not mean that, okay, someone needs to go to the restroom, they walk by someone else and they're not 6 foot apart from them. That's okay. that's just like a couple of seconds, right? So we're really talking about 6 foot distance and time, okay? So maintaining that 6 foot distance for projects that are going to go on for a while, okay? The other important thing is that even though the density cap has been, and the color codes have been eliminated, it's still important that we have safety mitigation in laboratories. So aside from the 6 foot distance, masks are still required, and symptom screening, which is that little email you get every day, symptom screening is required of all personnel. In addition, if you have unvaccinated personnel in your laboratory, they are still required to have COVID-19 testing, depending upon whether they're students or staff. That will dictate whether it's a weekly or bi-weekly testing. And finally, what about lab meetings? Okay, so meetings are still restricted to 10 people indoors. They have to be masked and they have to maintain 6 foot distance. Okay, so if your lab is bigger than 10 people and you still want to have a lab meeting, well, you might have to split that into 2 lab meetings, okay? Because the limitation as of today is still 10 people. Next slide, please. So this is just a couple of slides that highlight the CDC recommendations, color-coded for your benefit. So on the right is fully vaccinated people. On the left is unvaccinated people, okay? So you can see that pretty much anything is cool for fully vaccinated people. And remember, these are CDC recommendations. There's always a question that comes up that says, well, why are we more restrictive than the CDC? Well, these are CDC recommendations. They are not CDC mandates. They're not CDC strict guidelines. Those are imposed by each state, okay? So each state will look at the CDC recommendations and will decide on their own mandates. Now, as many of you know, just reading the newspaper, the state of California is somewhat more restrictive than other states, okay? And you've probably also heard that many of those restrictions will be lifted on June 15th, okay, if things continue to go well. However, even the state realizes that the final mandates, okay, are by county, okay? So we are dependent on the county of San Diego for these restrictions, okay? So we have to follow their guidelines. And that's why sometimes there can be a disconnect between the guidelines, mandates, restrictions from the county of San Diego and the recommendations from the CDC, okay? So I'm not going to go through each of these. They're pretty straightforward. You can look at them. This is being recorded. You can look at it again on the Return to Learn website. Next slide, please. This is just the final bit of that. One thing I would point out, if you look at the second from the last, it says, eat in an indoor lunchroom, 6 foot distancing, okay? And it shows you the vaccinated person, green, meaning okay, but they're wearing a mask. And some of you may go, well, wait a second, I can't eat or drink wearing a mask. So obviously what this is saying is that in an indoor lunchroom or an indoor conference room with food and drink, okay, if you're vaccinated, you can remove your mask to eat or drink, but then you have to put your mask back on when you're done, okay? So this is similar to what used to be in terms of outdoors. Now outdoors is totally open, but this restriction still applies indoors, okay? So that's the only confusing thing I've seen on this bit. So anyway, back to you, Dean Antony. Thank you. I think Miroslav Kristic is the next to come.
Thanks, Dr. McCarrow. Yes, let's go ahead and now turn to Senior Associate Vice Chancellor for Research, Dr. Miroslav Kristic, who's going to tell us about behavioral research and music performances.
Thank you, Dean Antony and Dean McCarrow. So I have a couple of good news from the Research Continuity Task Force. The first one is on behavioral research. So all in-person activity, including focus groups, interviews, and so on, are now allowed, subject to the standard restrictions on social distancing, the masks being required, and symptom screening being done 2 weeks prior to coming to campus and on the day of the visit to campus. All these rules and restrictions apply also to misbehavioral research. On the music performances, the ensembles up to 10 persons are permitted. This is the same rule that applies to research meetings up to 10 persons, subject to the mask wearing and 6-foot distance rule. The masks should be worn by all except for those who are performance using the mouth. In other words, singers and brass and wind players. The distancing rules slightly differ for different musicians. The largest distance of 15 feet applies to singers because research shows that those are actually the highest emitters, and the higher the voice, the higher the emission. The sopranos are the highest emitters. Trumpet players, brass players, wind players, they need to keep a distance of 10 feet. The distance among dancers is to be no less than 12 feet. And all other instrumentalists need to keep a distance of 6 feet. There is such a thing as masks for brass and wind players. Those are recommended, as is masking for singers. The additional details are contained on this link of the Research Ramp Up website. And back to you, Dean Antony.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to turn to Michael Korn, Chief Information Security Officer, who will tell us about cybersecurity certification.
Thank you very much. Go on to the next slide, please. I don't think this crowd would be surprised by much of what's on this slide. Most of you, or I hope all of you, have heard about the OP data breach. Sadly, if you look at the items that are on here, every one of these affects our community, and every one of these are fairly recent. So we live in a world where the nature of the attacks against not just the campus, but specifically our research and our researchers are becoming more sophisticated, more common. The good news is that the campus does adapt how we approach cybersecurity in response to events like this. And we do have some initiatives focused specifically to help researchers tackle some of these challenges. Go on to the next slide. So I want to mention 3 things very quickly, and then I'll dive into a program we've put together specifically for researchers. We are retiring our support of the legacy Sophos antivirus product. Many of you are probably running this. We've used it for years. If you go to antivirus.ucsd.edu, you can see we're moving to a new contemporary anti-malware solution, much more effective. All of you are probably affected by the change to putting multi-factor authentication in front of email clients. Now, I appreciate that this was incredibly disruptive, and I apologize for that. Under normal circumstances, a change like this probably would have taken 3 months. But just as when you go to the doctor and you say, my heart, something's wrong in my chest, I have some heart pain, you're in the emergency room very, very quickly. When we make a change like this, and we do it on the time frame we did, basically 5 days, it's because we're in that kind of situation. So I apologize for how disruptive that was, but I hope everyone appreciates the urgency. Sometimes we have to move like this. Because a lot of the attention on research data stems from the risk of ransomware, it's critical to point out the issue of data backups. And I put on here a link to a website that we run on campus that provides a pretty comprehensive list of data backup options available to you, both most of which are fee-based. We are going to be revisiting this list and marking each option for its resilience to ransomware. But no matter what we do to prevent ransomware, these kinds of events will take place. And the single best preventative is to have solid backups that are resilient to ransomware. Remember what happened at UC San Francisco? The hackers actually went into the research environment and deleted their backups. And that's what really resulted in the campus having to pay a ransom. But we do have another program, and you can see the overview of that at assure.ucsb.edu. I see someone has posted the link in the chat as well. Go to the next slide, please. So we actually have two programs going to support research. We're trying to tackle this from two directions. The one I'm going to talk about in a minute is the cybersecurity certification for research. Basically, that's an attempt to understand and document better who's doing what research and where they're doing it, and to provide you with very, very lightweight tools to increase your resilience from cyber attack, which will go a long way to improving, for example, reproducibility of your data, and to prevent your scientific workflows from becoming unavailable due to cyber attack. At the same time, we have a much more aggressive program to tackle some new Department of Defense requirements around cybersecurity. That's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. I won't go into that much today. And many of you may be saying, I don't do DoD research. What difference is this to me? What we're doing with this program, though, is while we're building an infrastructure specifically to support DoD requirements, we will be expanding those resources out to support other forms of regulated research. And I can tell you right now, agencies such as NSF, Department of Energy, even NIH are watching the CMMC program and may adopt it over the next few years. So this is going to be important for everyone in the fullness of time. Next slide. But I really want to talk here about our cybersecurity certification for research program. What we did is we created a very, very lightweight program that will be required of all faculty and non-faculty researchers to go through a self-certification process. Everything about the program can be delegated, from collecting the information to installing the required software, except at the end of the certification process, you'll have to sign off that the information collected is correct. There is support available if you need assistance getting software installed or completing the information. We do have people available that can come out and help, either virtually or in person. But it's very straightforward. We're collecting a lot of contact information. Often we find if there's a compromised machine in a laboratory environment, it could take us 2 or 3 days sometimes to figure out who to contact. And we don't know whether we should be taking the equipment offline because it's compromised, or are we going to damage a long-standing data collection exercise? So it's very important that we're able to get a hold of people quickly. We ask for a bunch of information. You can read about it on the website. I've got it bullet pointed here. The only technical controls we actually require are the installation of these 2 software packages, the contemporary anti-malware package and a piece of software that identifies vulnerabilities in your systems, which allows us to report them back to you so you're aware of them and your IT staff can deal with them. So we've designed this whole program to be very, very lightweight, very quick. And at the end of it, you will get a letter we've put together stating your certification so that you can add that to your data management plan when you submit a grant proposal. It's part of the make-weight argument to demonstrate to sponsors that you're paying attention to cybersecurity. And the certification is good for 3 years. So you'll be seeing a campus notice on this fairly shortly. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. The website's pretty complete. So with that, back to you, Dean Antony.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Now we will hear from our final presenter, Ross Damon, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Contracts and Grants. He's going to tell us about updates and reminders for sponsored projects.
Thank you, Dean Antony. We're excited to announce that after a several-year hiatus of the Research Administration Training Program, we'll be relaunching it this year. This program will include pre-award, post-award, and compliance topics that will be aimed at fund managers or research administrators who are new to UC San Diego or to those who need a refresher. We know how critical it is to provide support for the knowledge, skills, and abilities to our staff in this highly specialized field so that they can support the faculty and our research mission. This training is a blend of virtual instructor-led trainings and e-courses that are open and free of charge for all research administrators across campus. To get started, we encourage supervisors to direct their staff to the RA Orientation Essentials courses available on demand through UC Learning. Essentially, there are 4 levels for the RA training program. Level 1 will be kicking off in this August, and will be delivered 4 times a year. Level 2 will be kicking off in October and will be delivered 3 times in fiscal year 22. In addition to level 1 and 2 training programs, we'll also be launching sponsored research onboarding, instructor-led sessions to help onboard new employees into the field of sponsored research. This will be delivered at a regular cadence and will be a great introduction for new employees that are new to sponsored research. The RA training program leverages systems trainings that already exist that users can take, UC Path, Kuali, and Oracle, and that should be part of the new hire process. If you have any questions, please feel free to send an email to the ra-training@ucsd.edu. This reboot of the RA training program initiative is really a big thanks in large part by the investment made by campus leadership and Vice Chancellor Brown in resources to support not only this training program, but also to provide better service and support for your proposal, review, and improve the turnaround timing when negotiating and setting up awards. And we're excited to be moving in that direction, as that will allow us to accomplish that goal and to help you better. Next slide, please. UC San Diego has had its fair share of attention recently: foreign involvement, data security, as you just heard, and other issues. These types of non-compliance create reputation risks and more work for the university. However, over the last year, many other top-tier institutions have fared much worse: negative publicity, headlines, faculty firings, and institutional fines. UC San Diego is committed to the highest ethical and legal standards in the conduct of research, and to ensure that we are supporting our research community with the proper oversight and guidance to effectively carry out their research. These issues have impacted the sponsored programs offices, as Vice Chancellor Brown mentioned earlier, with respect to the NIH foreign engagement activities, requiring more due diligence, compliance, validation checks, and an increased focus from UCOP requiring greater due diligence and rigor by sponsored program offices to avoid such headlines and manage the occurrence of non-compliance. These external pressures have increased the effort and time required to do a proposal review. And in addition to the 15% proposal growth, as you saw, and recent budget cuts, the need for a better process is now more important than ever. So the 14.5 and 2 focuses on 2 key indicators to help address the challenges and provide the sponsored project offices with enough time to do the review. Create the proposal in the quality system 14 days before the deadline, and route the proposal with the required elements to the contracting grant officer 5 days before the deadline. And then provide the final draft of the research plan to the contracting grant officer 2 days before the deadline. These guidelines are consistent with other top-tier research universities and will help to alleviate any concerns faculty have about proposals potentially not being submitted on time. We've developed a dashboard for campus leadership to assess how they're performing relative to these indicators. The goal for each of the departments is to achieve 100% compliance against these key indicators by July 2021. Currently, the campus rates, as you can see, are for the 14 days, 38%, for 5 days, 39%. These numbers have increased significantly from last year when they were 12% and 5% respectively. We greatly appreciate all your efforts you have made to ensure UC San Diego's commitment to the highest ethical and legal standards, as well as a top 10 research institutions. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me. Thank you, and back to you, Dean Antony.
Thank you so much, Ross. Okay, now it's time to move to the question and answer segment of our program. I'm going to invite all of our panelists to turn on their video. They will be joined by Committee on Research Chair Victor Ferreira and AVC for Resource Management and Planning, Steve Jackson. Here's how this is going to work. So during registration, attendees had an opportunity to submit questions for all of the panelists to answer. We have selected some of the most popular questions for the panel today. Now, if you have a question, please use the Q&A window to submit additional questions during our session, and our panelists will do their best to provide answers. Of course, due to time limitations, we may not be able to get to all of your questions today. However, we will do our best to post answers to the questions in the FAQ at returntolearn.ucsd.edu. We're going to go ahead and post that link for you once again. All right, so now we're going to turn to the first question. And this one is for AVC Jensen. What will summer instruction look like this year, and what kinds of activities will be allowable on campus during this summer?
Thank you, Dean Antony. So summer classes are going to look very similar to what we've seen this spring. The same restrictions, the same safeguard. The vast majority of summer classes will be remote, but we have some 80 classes in person. Almost 12,000 UC San Diego students have signed up for summer classes. That's a huge number. And that includes almost half of our seniors. So it's clear that summer is a very important part of their academic journey. In terms of other activities, we have an extensive research opportunities program with students in person and remotely. And we will have onboarding programs like Summer Bridge coming back either in person or hybrid.
Okay, we're going to stay with you, AVC Jensen. A second question, similar. What will fall instruction look like? Will instructors be required to offer hybrid or virtual offerings for their in-person courses? And will faculty be expected to hold office hours primarily in person, or will Zoom be an allowable option?
So for fall, we're excited to return to predominantly in-person instruction. As Dr. Martin shared earlier, our modeling shows that this will be a safe environment to work and to learn in. While we will need to have some remote and hybrid classes to accommodate students whose arrival is delayed due to visas or travel restrictions, we also understand that some faculty may be unable to teach in person in the fall. Decisions on how to best serve our students and our faculty are going to be up to the individual academic program. In some cases, a class may be taught as a hybrid. In others, a class may be split into two, each using a different modality. Where possible, we're trying to make sure that faculty aren't asked to do double duty by trying to serve two very different modalities at the same time. As to office hours, that's a really interesting question. We really encourage faculty to decide how best to support their students. Remote office hours may be great. They can increase access. They can increase the kind of hours that students can reach you for. But in some cases, that personal touch, that personal interaction will be very important. And it really will be up to faculty to decide what the appropriate interaction or the appropriate mix of the two works for them and for their students.
Thanks so much. Okay, let's turn this question to EVC Simmons. Will masks and social distancing be required for all undergraduate courses, regardless of enrollment size?
Thanks very much for the question. We are waiting to make a final decision about masking in fall classrooms until we see the anticipated update to state guidance, which we think is going to come out in another couple of weeks, to see what the state guidance is for higher education, because all along we've tried to very carefully follow what the California Department of Public Health has been issuing as public health guidance, and the county has generally been very closely aligned with that. So we said back in February, back before there was widespread vaccination, before we knew when widespread vaccination would be possible, and based on the CDC and California guidance back in February, that we anticipated that masking would be required in the classrooms. Now with widespread vaccination, as you've heard from Dr. Martin, already 75 to 80% of employees are vaccinated, and similar numbers for the students who are local that we know about. We no longer know whether masking will need to be required for fall classrooms. However, we know that we have to make a decision by about the middle of June, because July 1st is when some final decisions about classroom modalities are going to be made by academic programs, as ADC Jensen said. So we'll be giving an update in a couple weeks to give enough time for everyone to know exactly what the answer is before they make their final, have their final conversations with their departments about modality. A long answer, but that's because it's an evolving situation.
Thank you so much. The next question we are going to pose to Vice Chancellor Brown and Interim Chief Human Resources Officer Winbush. Can we maintain mask mandates in our own labs even when or if campus-wide mask mandates are removed? Why don't we have VC Brown tackle that question first?
Sure, thank you. And what an important question, because it really goes to the heart of the anxiety that many faculty and staff, researchers, and even students feel if they're not vaccinated. We want this to be a safe environment, and I just want to put the context for this, and then I'll turn it over to both Terry Winbush and maybe Elizabeth Simmons would like to comment on this as well. But just to remind people, we already have 75% of folks on our campus vaccinated. It's a safe environment. We heard that from the prevalence information that was presented earlier by Natasha. We've essentially reached, for our faculty and our on-site staff already, herd mentality or immunity. That's important to remember. It's a safe environment. You might have personal reasons now for wearing masks and in the future. I'm anticipating that the new way of functioning in the United States will be many situations where people will be wearing masks because they choose to do so. And individuals that come to campus, we require that they meet the requirements of our campus to maintain that safety. That's whether these are delivery people coming and bringing things for the academic mission or the research mission, or whether they're research participants coming onto campus or volunteers coming onto campus. So I want to just create the context before we hear the rest of the response to this hypothetical that we are a safe environment.
Thank you, Sandy. And I think it is important to provide that framing and context. The thing that I will say is we don't want to have individualized labs or, and I know Elizabeth, you can speak to, we don't want to have individualized classroom rules. So people don't know how to operate from one space to the next. It'll be very difficult for folks to understand if there's a requirement in one classroom or one lab, and then they have to walk across the hall and there's a different requirement there. It'll be very difficult to function in that way. But the bottom line is it's unnecessary. The way that we need to start shifting our minds is to taking care of ourselves. So if you are unvaccinated, wear your mask. And if you cannot get vaccinated, wear your mask. If the vaccine is not effective for you, wear your mask. But also for those of you who are vaccinated and you want to wear a mask, do it. It is okay. No one will have anything to say to you about it. I will just say, I'm fully vaccinated. And if you see me on campus, you will probably see me in a mask. I'm modeling behavior for my 6-year-old and 11-year-old who can't get vaccinated yet. And it's hard to tell them do as I say and not as I do. So I'll be wearing a mask whenever I'm out and about so that they know that that's required for their safety. Do what is best for you and do your best not to worry about others. I know that is hard, especially with something as scary as COVID has been for us as a continent. But this is about self-care. Wear your mask if you are uncomfortable, and that is your best protection. If you can get vaccinated and it's effective for you, do so. That is your best protection, okay? So it's about self-care. That's what I will say.
And I completely agree. The same strategy would be followed in teaching spaces as well. Those who need to wear a mask themselves, please do so. Those who simply want to wear a mask themselves, please do so. But rules mandating mask usage will follow the California public health guidelines as we see what they are.
Thank you so much for those helpful responses. Now we've got a question that came in on the live Q&A. I'm going to direct that question to VC Brown. So let me read it verbatim. With the campus implementing a division between vaccinated or unvaccinated, it has been expressed to me by staff members they don't feel safe that if they choose not to be vaccinated right now and other members in our lab find out that they will be treated differently. There is strong anxiety beginning from the division the campus is discussing. VC Brown?
Yes, I think it's a great follow-up question to what we just discussed. People are not going to be treated differently. How you care for yourself may be different, but whether we're talking about what's expected in the classroom or what's expected in the work environment, we expect people to be treated fairly, with equity, and in alignment with the safety standards that we use on campus. So we're not going to mandate something that's not required, and we're going to support a safe and healthy environment. If there are instances, and perhaps I'll turn this back over to Terry, but if there are instances where you feel that you are treated unfairly, we have means and mechanisms to deal with that. And we're going to be talking with leadership, with research program leadership, lab leadership, about how to manage these things to ensure that this is a safe, fair, and equitable environment. Terry?
I just echo everything that you said, Sandy. And truly, if someone does feel they've been treated unfairly, there are so many avenues to reach out to. You can reach out to your HR to help support you. You can reach out to the Office for the Prevention of Harassment and Discrimination. You can reach out to the ombuds. You can file a whistleblower hotline. But the thing you might be able to do is just say, you know, I feel uncomfortable about how I was just spoken to or how I was just treated. And I'm hoping that's not what your intention was. And maybe we can discuss it further to make sure that we have clarity amongst each other. And that might be the easiest thing to do if you're comfortable enough with having that conversation. But if not, reach out to those avenues or another colleague that you feel comfortable speaking with that's a leader who can help guide you through addressing the concerns that you may have.
Great, thank you so much.
If I could just add one thing to that, you know, I think this is a really important question, and looking at both the chat and the Q&A, I can see it overlaps with several other similar questions, which sort of revolve around what can I ask someone whether they're vaccinated or unvaccinated if I'm a PI in a lab? And this whole issue about, oh, well, this is a medical issue. Doesn't it fall under HIPAA? I'm not allowed to ask. I can say, yeah, I can see how everyone's confused about this. It is confusing. So I went and asked Dan Park, who's the campus counsel, that means lawyer for those of you who aren't familiar. And I said, well, what's the story here? I mean, can you not ask someone, what's the story? And it turns out that you can ask someone whether they're vaccinated or unvaccinated. That is not anti-HIPAA. HIPAA, if you don't know what that is, that's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which sounds like a lot of garbage, but that's what they do, HIPAA. Okay, so yes, you can. That's no problem. However, the person you ask does not have to answer you, because this is their, this is medical information about them. And so his recommendation, and this is going to punt it back to Terry Winbush again, his recommendation was, if you're worried about whether people in your lab are vaccinated or unvaccinated, turn to human resources, because the whole key in HIPAA is that the information about whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated has to be stored in a specific way, and health resources knows how to store that. So Terry, what's your take on that?
So Jim, while you're legally correct, and that is the legal determination, our campus leadership has determined that we are not asking that question of our colleagues at this time. There's a number of things separate and apart from HIPAA that does implicate human resources issues, storing the data, how we track it, how people are treated, whether it then implicates a basis for someone to be discriminated against, et cetera, that we are not at this point engaged in. As you may all know, there is a vaccine policy that is being reviewed by the Office of the President at this time. And once they make a final determination on that policy, there will be information on how that policy will then be upheld, if you will, or enforced. I can tell you the tone and tenor of the conversations within our senior leadership is that we will not be in a space where we will be asking people on a daily basis, are you vaccinated? Are you unvaccinated? Because of that very thing about treating someone differently. But instead, we will be shifting to a modality of taking care of yourself. So going back to what I said earlier, when you have a concern, you take the safety precautions that alleviate your concern. Those are not checking on your fellow person. Those are checking on yourself. Wear your mask, take the safety precautions, and if you can get vaccinated, please do so. Do not engage in asking people whether they're vaccinated or not. There are implications from supervisors to subordinates and other things that we are not engaged in, prepared on right now. And there is enough on all of your HR personnel and managing a number of other things behind the scenes right now to not also have to take on the wave that will begin if someone starts to ask those questions. So I completely agree with Dan, and then we'll tell you from our campus, don't ask that question right now. Thank you.
Great, very robust conversation there about an important topic. Let's slightly switch gears here. I'm going to direct this conversation to EVC Simmons and AVC Jensen. Here's the question. Will students be required to be vaccinated? And if not, what if we don't feel comfortable teaching in a classroom?
So let me take the first part about vaccination requirements, and then AVC Jensen can remind us of the options that instructors have. So the University of California has been saying steadily for a number of weeks now that it intends to implement a vaccination mandate for all students as soon as there are vaccines that have full FDA authorization. And at the moment, no vaccines have such authorization. However, Pfizer, as you will have seen in the news, did apply already for FDA authorization, and Moderna has announced it's going to soon. So it seems, according to what my medical colleagues have told me, it seems likely that we will have vaccines with full authorization before the fall, in which case the UC mandate will kick in, and there will be a requirement for all students to be vaccinated to be on campus. Naturally, as with any vaccination mandate, there are always some very limited exceptions, say for health reasons, for example. But we can anticipate that there most likely will be a mandate in force for fall.
So to answer the second part of the question of what do you do if you feel unsafe? So the Senate has granted a waiver to the remote or the distance learning policy for fall. The process is that departments can start switching modality of courses starting July 1st. And they can do that because they need to address faculty concerns or limitations. Not everyone will be able to take the vaccine because of underlying medical conditions, et cetera. As well as our need to support students who either are unable to join us because of visas or travel restrictions or issues like that. So there will be an adjustment period. And this is why we're keeping a very careful eye on all the latest guidance around masking. We're keeping an eye on vaccination rates, et cetera, so that before that deadline arrives, we can present campus, we can present our faculty with the best and most updated information about what we think conditions are actually going to be like in the fall.
Great, thank you, both of you. Okay, this is a question for ABC Damon. What do department chairs have to do in quality proposal as part of the pre-submission process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as part of the effort to streamline and expedite the proposal review process, only proposals that contain new space, needing a PI exception and/or have cost sharing will be routed to the MSO and the department chair for approval prior to submission. Department chairs will be notified from the quality system asking them to review and approve the proposal as part of the routing process. Once those approvals have been made, next it will go to the contracting grant officer for review and submission to the sponsor, which is why earlier when we spoke about the 14, 5, and 2, it's so important because that can tie up the proposal process if it's not approved timely. Now, for proposals that do not contain new space, needing a PI exception, or have cost sharing, neither the MSO or the department chair will need to review or approve these proposals. And so approximately about less than 5% of our proposals have new space, cost sharing, or needing PI exception. So that means that the department chairs will not need to approve approximately 95% of their proposals, thereby helping to expedite the process to ensure it gets to the contracting grant officer on time and submitted on time. However, if you are a department chair in SIO, for those proposals that do not include a new space, needing a PI exception, or have cost sharing, you will receive an email from the quality system requesting your acknowledgement of the proposal. This is not a requirement for the proposal to be submitted, but it's a way for you to be aware of a proposal that is being submitted in your department. So there are slightly differences for general campus and health sciences compared to SIO. So I would encourage you to, if you have any questions, contact your sponsored project office.
Thank you so much. Okay, this next question I'm going to direct to VC Brown. What are the guidelines and restrictions for non-bench work research staff coming back to office work?
Oh, good question. This really is about research staff because the guidelines are the same, whether it's bench work, whether it's non-bench work, whether you're doing creative and performing arts. All of the research staff will go through the same process, the same decision-making process that we use in the return to campus process, guided by HR. So staff will be treated fairly and equitably across all of the sites in which they work. We'll be rolling out, HR is rolling out some guidelines to assist those who are making the decisions in their units to help them with those decisions. So Terry, I don't know if you'd like to say anything else about that, but the bottom line message is really it's same for all staff, whether it's research or academic. We're going to follow the same guidelines.
I just say that that's accurate. Thank you, Sandy. I appreciate it.
Okay, wonderful. So Terry, while you're there, we've got a couple of questions that are going to be coming your way. So let's talk about the first set of questions. Will staff who have worked effectively from home be allowed to continue to work remotely? Will there be reconsideration, or will there be consideration for employees returning who have health concerns? Let's start with those.
So the first thing I'll say is there's always a concern for employees who have health concerns, and we have a disability counseling and consulting unit that can support them, whether it's regarding returning or shifting work modalities or in their current work modality. So always feel free to connect with disability counseling and consulting or work with your HR to make that connection so that you're always being supported regardless of what your work modality is. As to the first question, it's a loaded one, right? The question is, if I feel like I've been doing a good job at home, why would I ever come back? That's essentially what that question is. It's the question that people send me in my inbox. And the short answer is most folks will have some form of flexibility, whether that is hybrid work, whether that is a shift in their work schedule, whether that is a shift in the core hours of their department. Most folks will have some form or shift in flexibility for the work that they've been performing. Now, will that mean that you who've been at home for the last 15 months will continue to be home in perpetuity? Probably not, but possibly if that is appropriate for the work that you do and appropriate for the needs that we have for the operation. So the key is don't just assume that your supervisors, managers, and senior leaders aren't thinking about you and how great things have been over the last 15 months. They absolutely are. And these are very important conversations. What's also important is what our overarching mission is regarding our students and having a vibrant campus and making sure that we have those connections that occur in person. So all of those things are being balanced. You should not envy your leaders in the decisions that they have to make and the assessments that they have to do. But I can assure you they're all thinking about you and what your requests are and desires are as well after they assess what the operational needs are. So we're working closely together. I know that I've talked to many of the folks that you all are seeing on camera right now, and they are speaking with their hearts as we are going through this process. So please know that everyone is trying to do the best for the organization and for all of you, because we do want you to be successful and to be able to focus and have that work-life balance while also maintaining a vibrant campus and meeting our operational needs. So that is not an answer directly to your person's question, but I think it covers it.
Great. Well, let's keep you on stage here for a minute because there's another question. Here it is. Will there be a ramp-up time for staff to return to work on campus?
So in the sense that we are working on phasing things based on priorities of what the requirements are for operational needs, there is a ramp up. Will each unit have a situation where if ultimately the person's work modality would have them in person for 4 days per week or 3 days per week, would they begin with 1 day first or 2 days first? Not necessarily, but in some cases, right? So it really depends on what needs to happen in that unit. The supervisors and managers we've been talking to and the senior leaders, they're very sensitive to the needs of the employees as we begin to phase back. So it's important that we are all taking into consideration the different external factors that are affecting folks, to the extent that we say, your work is required in person, 3 days per week. And that person says, okay, but I have a 7-year-old that I can take nowhere because they're not vaccinated. So what can I do? So then we can have an individualized conversation and address the operational needs and the needs of that employee at that time. So the short answer is there is a phase back, but not necessarily a ramp up within the unit per se, unless that makes sense for that unit. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Terry. We're going to keep you there for one more moment here because there's a live Q&A question here. Let me see if I can paraphrase it. Are the same return to workplace guidelines for health sciences too? It's confusing because our HR is with health science system.
Well, lucky for you all, I work very closely with Janet Kammerman, who is the CHRO for the health and health sciences folks. And the policy that is being implemented is for both the campus and health side. So we will all be working from the same policy. Now the forms will be a little bit different. I know that health systems and health sciences have some forms that are different, and they'll have their own page that you can go to, but we're all operating from the same framework and operating from the same principles and guidelines.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Terry. Okay, switching gears here. This question's for ABC Jackson. With many returning to work on a hybrid schedule, how are we going to handle parking limitations and costs?
So thank you very much, Dean Antony, and for the opportunity to participate in today's town hall. In response to the question, with many returning to work on a hybrid schedule, RMP Transportation Services has implemented several operational improvements, including increased parking flexibility with the capability to pay for single days of parking using the parking app based on permit type. There's now no limit on the number of single days that someone can park. The previous caps that were in place with the 10-day permits have been removed. And daily parking rates, we're maintaining them at current levels and they have not been increased. So for more information, I welcome everyone to please visit the Transportation Services homepage, which has this information also prominently displayed. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Okay, this question is for Dr. Martin. Will the campus continue its wastewater monitoring program for COVID-19 in the fall?
Thanks. Yes, we do plan to continue the wastewater monitoring program. Just a quick update. We have 126 wastewater samplers that collect wastewater from over 340 buildings on campus. Those wastewater samplers are collected and processed every day, 7 days a week for the residential buildings, Monday through Friday for the non-residential buildings. We don't have enough flow on the weekends to do weekend collection. All that information, the results are processed daily, and it is shown on the daily website. And I would say, our daily dashboard. And I just want to mention that the analyses that we've done over this year indicate that the wastewater is highly sensitive in detecting even asymptomatic infections, detecting sort of 85% of the infected cases that we see, individuals we see on campus in the wastewater. And finally, one of the things we're also doing is we are sequencing the virus that we find in the wastewater. So the wastewater really provides us a powerful way of monitoring not just viral activity on campus, but whether there are variants on campus that we need to be concerned of. So really strong part of our program now and in the fall.
Thanks so much. Okay, this question is for Director of the Office of IRB Administration, Kip Cantello. If I don't expect to submit anything in Quali IRB until the end of the year, am I required or advised to take a training class now?
This is a great question. As Vice Chancellor Brown mentioned, Quali IRB goes live July 7th. That really marks the start of a year-long rolling transition. So there is some room on when to get training. You'll benefit most from training now if you plan to submit new studies, for example, in July or August, so in the coming months, or if you have existing studies that expire around September or October, and that will need to transition to Quali IRB. That said, training is not required at all, but we do offer and will continue to offer a variety of live group options by Zoom. Recordings are being posted. We will also start one-on-one or drop-in Zoom sessions once we get closer to go live. So really the amount of detail, the timing will be up to your needs and your preferences as researchers. So for example, going back to the question, if you won't be submitting a new study or transitioning an existing study until around November, there'll be plenty of resources available to you at that time. So unless you like to get an early start, there's no need to rush to learn something that won't be concrete for you quite yet. And just as one added note, these engagement opportunities are not limited to the Quali deployment. With the ongoing transformation of our office, we have been and will continue to expand our communication channels and demystify our process.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Okay, this question is for Vice Chancellor Brown. Is there a target date for full occupancy of research labs?
Well, that's a really good question because it's hard to know what full occupancy means because we have new ways of working. as was mentioned just a bit ago, some staff may continue to work at home because they can effectively do that and come in on an intermittent basis. So if the question put more broadly is, when will all restrictions be eliminated related to the risk for SARS-CoV-2, your guess is as good as mine. We will, as a campus, be dealing with that together. Currently, what our approach is to be maximally convenient and to allow each of the investigators to have the most flexibility that will afford them to get the largest amount of work done. So our hope would be that we will be up to full capacity, even if every single person isn't there every single day. We're anticipating that not to be the new normal. So if you can find ways, and we're happy to talk with you about strategies for sequencing and organizing the work that you have, if you can find new ways to engage your staff and to get work done, some of which can be done offsite, some of which can be onsite, or with flexible schedules. We'll do all of that because we want you to be able to do the work that you want to do in a research setting.
Thank you so much. Okay, we've got a question here for AVC Jensen. Where remote teaching and learning has been effective over the past year, will that model be supported going forward?
That's a great question. We've certainly learned a lot over this last year, and some of our faculty and some of our students have struggled in this shift to remote, but for many, it's actually been a boon for learning. And where possible, we want to continue to support and encourage that. So, for instance, the Teaching and Learning Commons will, going forward, actually have a broader set of offerings around student support, tutoring, et cetera, remotely, because we've seen that more students take advantage of those opportunities and we can have more flexible hours. I know that there are many departments that are looking at shifting discussion sections to make more of those remote or hybrid or things like that. Now, teaching modality is under Senate purview, and there are lots of discussion going on right now about how we define remote teaching and the amount of flexibility that exists. And so I encourage all of our faculty who are interested in that to be engaged in that conversation, and we'll figure out how we grant this kind of flexibility where it makes sense.
Great, thanks. A question that we'll pose to you, Carlos, as well as to EVC Simmons. For those of us who have large groups of TAs teaching sections, can the TAs decide whether their sections will be taught remotely?
This really needs to be an academic program decision. We understand that there are going to be folks who are either unable to or hesitant to teach in person, but what needs to happen is that we need to try to match the needs of our faculty and TA to the needs of our students. We will, in most programs, need to support some amount of remote learners. We want to try to match the folks who need or would strongly prefer to teach remotely with the needs of those students. So it's not an individual decision made in a vacuum. It really needs to be a departmental decision. EVC Simmons?
I think you put it really, really well, AVC Jensen. There needs to be a conversation between the TA, the faculty member, and the department to make the best plan to support all of our students. Our students are very eager to start experiencing in-person instruction again. They've really missed it. So we need to be very, very careful and thoughtful in how we handle this.
Thank you. Now we have one last question. EVC Simmons, I'm going to keep you there, and we'll also add VC Brown. So here's the question. What supports will there be for faculty and graduate students to catch up on research time lost during COVID?
So I can answer from where I stand. There are a couple of different things. One is that certain time limitations as for establishing residency or the maximum number of quarters that one can act as a TA, those have been extended for graduate students in recognition of the COVID impacts on their progression toward degree. And we'll be continuing to need to look as a campus and as a system toward that kind of flexibility. For faculty, we've already given tenure clock extensions, for example, and we have a Senate admin work group looking more generally at what can be done to make sure that the academic review process appropriately takes into account the impacts of the COVID period on people's research programs. We'll hear from that work group, I think, in a month or so, so that we'll know what more we need to be doing in that direction. So those are the pieces that I know about most directly, and I think VC Brown probably has some other thoughts.
Yes, thank you very much. Really important question, because we've all been impacted by COVID, whether we're talking about our tenure clock or we're talking about the graduate students that work with us. And there's good news from the financial side, I think, that complements what EVC Simmons was saying. Funding agencies are ready to receive and willing to support both amendments and extensions for projects, for faculty, the researchers themselves, and for students. They're very supportive of this. I've spoken with a number of directors of federal agencies with this in mind. So I would encourage you, if you are concerned about that, speak with your project officer. All agencies are accepting extensions. Most agencies are accepting amendments for additional augmentation to their funding to ensure that the work can get done and that our students in training can be successful. So that's good news on that side.
Great, thank you. Well, folks, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Thanks to everyone for all your amazing questions. We will attempt to answer any questions we haven't answered by updating the FAQ that's posted on the Return to Learn website. And of course, we'll post a recording of this town hall momentarily. I'd like to thank all the presenters and guests for sharing their time and their amazing information with us today. And I thank you, the faculty and researchers of UC San Diego, for attending today and frankly for working together as a community to help bring us all through these unprecedented times. Also, we encourage you to complete a post-event survey that you will be sent shortly. It helps us to continue to improve our means of communication with you during this stressful period. Now, the next town halls are in the process of being planned and confirmed for June, and they will be posted on the RTL website. So this concludes the Return to Learn Faculty and Research Town Hall. Thank you, take care, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you on campus again soon.